Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for MPT's online launch of the issue Call the Sea, a Poet, focus on Malta. I'm holding in my hands the issue right now. It's beautifully illustrated by Yella Attard in red, black, and white. It's got birds on the front cover in the ocean with a boat. And there's Maltese significance to all of this, and you can read all about it in our issue. And actually, on the back cover, which I'm also showing right now, Yella has added an Easter egg, which is you can see one, two, three, four, five, six fists in Maltese Sign Language, spelling out the word language. So there's actually Maltese Sign Language on this cover as a bit of a hidden message, which I absolutely loved. Hi, my name is Khairani Barokka. You can call me Oka. I am the editor of Modern Poetry in Translation. I'm an Indonesian woman with red lipstick, wearing black glasses, and a red, brown, and black dress. And my Zoom background behind me is the cover of our issue, which I've just described briefly for you. We'd like to thank our funders who made this issue possible, the Maltese National Book Council, as well as Arts Council England. And if you would like to subscribe to MPT, whether you're an individual or an institution, please go to our website to find out more. We would love to keep in touch. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two excellent readers. A note that this is being BSL interpreted, very kindly being interpreted by Lynn and Audrey. Lynn starting off and then Audrey will follow. Thank you both so much. Our first contributor is Maria Grech Ganado, born in 1943, who translates from Maltese into English. Her poetry has been translated into 14 languages and has won 4 national book prizes. In 2005, she co-organized an international seminar in Malta. Our second contributor is Priscilla Cassar, who is a therapist, geragogist, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and a poet interested in arts and health. Thanks to Priscilla's bio, I Googled geregogy, which is a theory for teaching the elderly. I did not know this word before, so thank you, Priscilla, for that. Priscilla's poetry, prose, and translations have been published in a number of anthologies and projects, locally, online, as well as abroad. She continues working on her first collection of poems, which we're very lucky to be experiencing here today. So I'm going to start off with Priscilla, who's going to read for a little while, a few poems, and then Maria's going to read her poetry, and then we're all going to gather together in a discussion. I'm going to be asking questions, but you in the audience will also have the opportunity to ask questions of either of the two. And yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this. So Priscilla, please go ahead, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for having afforded us Maltese writers this wonderful opportunity and for having me here as one of the writers. And I'm really thrilled to have this event and my poems interpreted in PSL. So thank you. So my name is Priscilla. I am a Maltese woman, right? With mid-length brown hair and a pair of glasses, and I'm in my home surrounded by my library. So yes, so the poems, I'm going to start off with the first poem, which is actually the poem which was published in this issue. It was originally written in Maltese in 2016, and Maria kindly translated it into English. And it's called Collection. I wish I could steal some of your breath, fold it gently and save it. Pack the fingerprints you play hide and seek with upon my body in a casket, cracked by the warmth of the sun. Measure the stroke of your tongue tempting my breasts, and pour its weight into this casket I've saved in my chest. In this way, when the winds race each other to split one towards north, the other towards south, I can let out your breath, your fingerprints, and the stroke of your tongue. Air them and wear them, even in your absence. So the second poem I shall be reading is titled Amal. And I wrote this poem for a competition that I entered. It was a competition organized by Trócaire and Poetry Ireland in 2020. And the theme had to be standing her ground. So it had to be inspired somehow by stories of women battling to keep their families together. And I wrote this poem about a Palestinian woman, Amal. She should be crushing olives with calloused feet, inebriated by the heat of the day, in the shade of the primordial olive rose, whispering ancestral songs, carried on the wings of a flirting breeze. She should be passing her fingers through her daughter's curly hair, narrating stories of the nights once spent sleeping under the orange groves, escaping the shooting and looting under a sky tattooed with Al-Nakba. There were hearts crushed tightly, cries of loss and homeland, orange trees that were no more. She should be weaving life's troughs and bows, with grace riding the waves of womanhood, revered in the eyes of her beloved. And yet she is here, shouting at the perverse soldier hitting her unarmed man. Heart still needed to keep oozing oil and orange juice, to keep the wick alive. And she will be here tomorrow, till whenever it takes. She is here, praying that her eldest son, inshallah, is still breathing over the separation wall. There is one too many in the world, surviving on her memorized fragrance, on the smell of garlic on her fingers, the day she last reached out to him. She could be Maysoon, Riham, Wadha, Ibtisam, Salma, Amal. Amal, standing her ground. Amal, hope. So the third poem is actually an experiment. Last March, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Amsterdam for the Vermeer exhibition. And on the flights, I was reading Pilgrim Bell by Kaveh Akbar. And obviously his writing is very rich, densely rich in beautiful metaphors. And I started jotting down the ones which stuck with me. And when I came back somehow, I wanted to try to see whether I could write a poem, and this is the result. And actually it's called a collage poem or a cento poem. I had no idea before this. So, On Loss, After Pilgrim Bell by Kaveh Akbar. All day, I hammer the distance between earth and me, sewing song to throat, sewing silence to each tiny muscle of the neck. Time will bend what doesn't bend, even time. Loss is a vector, all magnitude and direction, filling us with words like seawater filling our lungs, like life lasting longer than you can bear. Some pain stays so long, its absence becomes a different pain. We have lost everything we need to lose. There is room in the language for being without language. The next two poems are two very short poems of mine, which I translated myself. And so the first one is, Let Tomorrow Wait. Tonight, nourish me with your words. Water me with flowers sprouting from your mouth. Let tomorrow wait. It might already be ready to pluck out a germinating rose. Magdalene, on her knees, scribbling between his toes, she never envisaged he would later stone her. The next poem was also written around a theme, which was Pathways to Peace. This was another competition of Poetry Ireland and Trócaire, which is a charity in Catholic charity in Ireland. And it's called Kairos. What is it that you have run away from, sister? From your family, your neighbor, your country, and its deranged war? Haven't we all shared the same homeland, trickling down the generations from Eva, the mother of life, when she parted her thighs, delivering rivers of humans, sharing the same genomic sequence? We must see with our hearts, sister. Let the varied shades of color drain from our skin to expose souls of one architectural form. Let us stop being made to shake the dust off our feet at the door, the Mediterranean Sea off our clothes, so that we are welcomed everywhere. We have to let our intonations sail above the sea of tongues, sister. Let our inflection lap at each other's shores of understanding, not mere tolerance. To dialogue away our fears, acquainting ourselves with the unknown. Let us build bridges across our hearts. Let no false prophets tear us apart with lies about each other. No race is superior, sister. Let us sing hymns of solidarity and navigate our destiny towards a Kairos moment of peace and sisterhood. And the last poem I shall be reading is titled Potato Stew, which was written in Maltese as Yakhanit Batata, which is the name of a Syrian, the name in Syrian. And this was part of the Poetry in Potato Bags project, which happened in 2018. And it was a collaboration between V18, Valletta 18, and Iniziamed, which is the local NGO, cultural NGO, which pushes and promotes Maltese literature abroad. And Maria was instrumental in this as well. It was translated by Claudia Gauci, who's another excellent poet, and also published in this issue. And it was a collaboration between V18 and Leeuwarden in the Netherlands. Potato stew. One thing I wanted to say, that it deals with this ongoing Syrian conflict. A kilo of potatoes. Oh, my land, which soil should I plow that doesn't bear bloody potatoes? Look, they're giving them to armed soldiers while our children are feeding off withered breasts, dreaming of clouds shaped like potatoes. Half a kilo of deboned lamb shanks, Like lambs, we are taken to be slaughtered. Our cracked bones are countless. So are the laments that are stifled as soon as they're uttered. A handful of chopped parsley. I can no longer smell the scent of za'atar, mint, or parsley. Instead, I endure the odor of loss. A chopped clove of garlic. Our children's bodies have been mutilated. Ears, fingers, bones. A chopped onion. My eyes are empty. I've no more tears to shed. Black pepper. It's raining bombs and bullets like fire and brimstone. Paprika. You can no longer find spices, nor your door, not even the lock, neither your bed, nor your linen, your clothes, not even your children. Rosemary. Dust and rubble beneath your feet. This is your rosemary. It flavors each step you take inside your city. Bharat. Perhaps I can still find spices as sweet as the skin of newborns who, on their second day, already know what their land has in store. Salt. Where can I find some salt to flavor my food instead of spreading it on these open wounds? Oil. Will truth, like oil, ever rise to the surface and spare us these endless journeys? So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Priscilla, and a big round of applause and a BSL applause as well for Priscilla. Thank you so much. Thank you so much also to everyone who's attended. I see some familiar names here, including fellow contributors to our issue Call the Sea, a Poet, focus on Malta. Before we hear the next reading, I'd just like to say that there has been an early question. Please save your questions for after the readings, but there's already been a question from Catherine van de Vat, who says, can we please hear one or two poems read in the original Maltese? And I said, well, when it's Maria's turn, I will ask her if she wants to do that. Would you like to do that, Maria? It's totally up to you whether or not you
I
want.
don't think I have the Maltese version because you said that we would read only in English. I'm sorry.
No, I said it was up to you whether or not you wanted to read bilingually or in
Yes, but I didn't prepare
okay,
it. But
that's all right. That's totally fine. But
wait,
yeah,
I'll just check, but I don't think I have it.
that's okay.
Anyway, I have to describe myself. I'm the Maltese woman in light blue with a furrowed face. I am 80 years old, and though older in time than Priscilla and lots of many younger poets, I am the oldest, I think, I lag behind in theme and style. So there is not so much intimacy in my poetry because I was I was one of the first to go to university, have a tertiary education, and to study actually English literature before I actually lectured it. So my poetry tends to be a bit formal. And I admire the younger poets because the poetry is so much more intimate. And as in Priscilla's case, so much more generous when it comes to seeing the history of other people. They've traveled more, it's true. Education has gone faster thanks to the web and the internet. So, and this is what I mean when I say I lag behind in a certain way, especially in theme and style. She mentioned the Nityamet and that I was instrumental. This is interesting because Nityamet started before we joined the European Union, but immediately before it, I met Alexandra Büchler of Literature Across Frontiers, a Welsh organization, and she joined Initiamed And we have a Mediterranean Conference Centre. Sorry, we have a Mediterranean Festival at the end of the year, which is now coming up and is run practically by women, only women participants. So I'll also say a word about women. There are so many women here, even as I talk. So big thanks to this festival. We have people invited from different countries around the Mediterranean, but also starting to go from other nations. And we have translation workshops where people translate poetry into different languages. And of course, this has helped a great deal with translation. And it was just after an important date, 2004, where we joined the European Union. And thanks to this, of course, lots of things started to pour in, like funds. So this plus everything has meant a great deal for our poetry scene. Before this, another important date was 1964, the year of independence. And 10 years later, 1974, which was the year when Malta stopped being a colony. Because when we stopped being a colony, more people became proud of the country and of the language. And if you wish to know what people felt, irrespective of women, but you can apply the poem to women as well, just look at your issue and read what Adrian Grima has to say in a very evocative talk about language, but also in the poem called "We Have Been Freed," because even with women, although we were freed, all of us together by independence and by the fact that we now have our republic, we were freed as well. Women were freed in a way which men weren't, in that we suddenly found ourselves capable, also through tertiary education, which became universal, to express ourselves in the way we weren't before, when Malta was a very patriarchal country. And even up to 12 years ago, there wasn't even a woman author presented in the curriculum which one needs to enter university, the matriculation. 2 years ago, there were only two of us. I was one, because when you're 80, you get into things which younger people don't. And this, after 2 years, six of us, six women are going to be there. The ratio is still 21 men to 6, but you can see in those 2 years how everything has increased. And we've got many, many wonderful women poets. And I think, if anything, women authors are outnumbering men. And soon there will be a greater number of women, because we don't have to prove anything anymore. But there is this fresh energy in us, which is very, very strong. I think I've said what I had to say, really, and I can turn to the poems now. The first poem I'm reading was actually written in English. I have, as already said, eight publications, 4 in Maltese and 4 in English. And this comes from the third collection, the third English collection. And the poems I have chosen have something to do with the sea, because this focus is called, from Gioele Gallia's poem, Call the Sea a Poet. So although I have poems which I can be very abstract and very concerned with the themes of time and the themes of language, I have chosen these poems because they deal with the sea. And here is the first, called Thought. If you hang them by your window in the morning, when the air is full of salt, you can hear them clicking like castanets. They keep you company while you make yourself a mug of tea, sit, sip, and watch them cavorting in the breeze, blowing into a picture, framed by your window like a magrette of a white sailing boat waiting suspended until your mug is empty. Then, with its cargo of your thoughts, the boat sails off again to lose itself at sea. So this is a poem about the sea as inspiration, as poet. And when I introduced a painter Magritte, I also thought of his quotation that nothing can compare to a beautiful conversation with a beautiful mind. Of course, the sea is personified there as a beautiful mind. The next poet I'm going to read is the one that appears in modern poetry in translation, and is a translation, in fact, of a Maltese poem. It's called The Wave, and this is where I become inward looking and very, well, not confrontational, but very aware of the tension in a heterosexual relationship. And as I say, it's called the wave, so the sea again. But the wave is a metaphor for this discrepancy between my intense character and that of my less emotional partner. It also has sexual connotations, which of course reflect this discrepancy. The wave. A number of times I'd set out to search for the wave that sweeps us all away. It was because of this I stripped you naked, then threw your clothes haphazardly up on a rock with mine, and though tiptoe under the moon, whispered to you between our kisses of a salt door within the wave. You pulled me close, waited in vain, and feeling cold you dressed and left, while I remained, licking the salt around my mouth with a dry tongue, still waiting for the wave that sweeps us all away. I think what I meant by the reference over there to the moon and on tiptoe and whispering was a difference between the romantic attitude inside the intensity, and of course, which is very different from the male attitude to the sexual connection. The next poem, The Edge, brings the sea in with the theme of Columbus sailing when belief was that the world was flat. There's also a reference to Copernicus and Ptolemy and Galileo, and actually refers to the flatness of the words in our conversation. So I'm already starting here to care about the discrepancy in language between what I want to say and the words which I use, which I'm not happy with about saying, and the spherical image, the world image, of what the relationship I want with the person I love. So the edge. Sometimes I see you glide right out and away and over the edge of the world. If we try to reach each other, our voices are like wind in your sails, like my wails in the wind. Columbus never set out. Galileo was justly condemned. Copernicus proved Ptolemy's great. And because we created words which were flat and burst those fears we might have had, I see you sail right out to sea and over the edge of the world. The next poem shows perhaps a generosity which Priscilla's poem showed with North Africa and what is happening except that rather than being about people who actually live there, it is about what happened, has happened, and is still happening. Because this week, hardly a week ago, 41 people have drowned as they try, like refugees, to sail to the west. Ours is a Mediterranean boat. And the Mediterranean has become a bit of a cemetery because over the past 9 years, about 20,000 refugees have drowned. I am taking it from the point of view of mothers who want to shield their children from what is happening, and of course, also, especially from the fact that it is children themselves who are drowning. I wrote it, it also refers to Mediterranean 2015, where a little boy in a red vest was washed up on shore. And it was right close to us. So obviously, it haunted us. The image of this little boy haunted me at any rate. And the poem is called Faulty. Mediterranean 2015. We scan each wave for flotsam pointing at us like fingers. Our children splash and treasure smooth pebbles in their hands, sailboats on our whispers. It's best that we tell each other if they don't know. Nightly, shadows rattle our windows, whine at our curtains, covet our beds. It's only the wind, we say. Now, those are the 4 poems about the sea, and I don't know if I've got time to read another one. So I'll stop there.
Thank you
Thank you.
so very much, Maria and Priscilla.
Yes, well, thank you. I haven't talked to you yet. Thank you all.
And thank you as well to Lynn and Audrey, of course, for interpreting. Before we go on to the questions, I'd just like to say that everyone, please check out modernpoetryintranslation.com. I know there have been a request for the poets to read in the original Maltese, and we're happy to say that on our website, you can find audio recordings of some of the contributors, including some of you here today, reading the poems, some of which are in English to begin with, but some of which have both the Maltese audio and then the English audio. And you can access those recordings on our website as well as through our podcast. So we have a podcast that actually has a lot of loyal listeners, and you can find that on any podcast platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whichever. And if you just search for Modern Poetry in Translation as a podcast, each of those recordings is an individual mini episode. So you can access Maltese readings of poetry through there. But without further ado, I'd like to thank Maria and Priscilla so very much for your contributions.
Yes, and I'm sorry if I suggested that we don't have the Maltese, but I believed myself that we had to read in English. Not because you actually said it was up to us.
Yeah, it's okay. It's all right. So Kate, another viewer here, has asked if Priscilla, I know that Maria, you said you didn't have any poems in Maltese, but Priscilla, do you have one of your poems in Maltese with you? It's okay if you don't have it now.
I actually have collection, and I do have collection, yes, here.
Okay, so maybe I can ask a question of Maria, ask a question to both of you first, and then when it's time for an answer from just Maria, then you can go and look for your collection and we can hear the Maltese from you, if that's okay.
That's okay.
Okay, wonderful. So Kate, there's your answer. We live to serve here at MPT. So actually, I'm going to go to audience questions first, to make sure that all of you have your questions answered, even though I have many of my own. So Caroline Davies says, thank you to MPT for featuring Maltese poets. Are there any other places where we can read contemporary Maltese poets? So you are so lucky, Caroline, because there are titans of Maltese literature currently with us. And I'm sure that feel free everyone to type in the chat suggestions, but also if I may, Presspar Press is a UK indie press that is also funded by one of our funders, Maltese National Book Council, and they publish exclusively Maltese authors, so Presspar Press. We have actually one half of Presspar Press, one of the co-publishers, Kat, is also in our MPT issue, so you can go to them for one. And Maltese National Book Council, I'm sure, has other suggestions. Everyone feel free to put things in the chat as well. Anonymous attendee says, thank you for these readings. It's fantastic. Thank you for being here. I'm in the early stages of learning Maltese and I'm loving its sounds and rhythms. Could you tell us what Maltese is like to write poetry in? Does it have grammatical features or sounds that are particularly enjoyable to use or frustrating? I think that's true of every language. And what are the particular challenges for translation into English? Thanks. So that's a great question. Maria, if you'd like to go first, maybe you've translated some of Priscilla's work and others' works as well.
Yes, well, I came to translation thanks to Initiative as well, although I had translated something before. Because of these, I very often use translation from Maltese into English, although I've stopped now, because for 9 years I stopped publishing and submitting as well, even to English journals, which had published some of my work, because I wanted to translate from Maltese into English, even as a bridge language. And because I write in both languages, it was not so difficult for me because I'm also a poet. So I didn't always translate literally, but translated according to the spirit of the language. Maltese language has really been studied. It's a fledgling language within the university, as a university in the university curriculum. When I started studying, even English literature was I mean, the whole faculty of arts was at the beginning when I started studying, but Maltese, because of being a colonial country, was looked down upon as a language. And is a very interesting language because it is affiliated to the Semitic language of Arabic. So our sounds are very often like Arabic, but muted because they've been muted by European usage. And we have, what's interesting about it is that we very often have the same vocabulary. And again, one can read Adrian Grima's essay about this. But for example, a word for God is Allah. Not Allah, but Allah, because of the culture we received from North Africa. And what's interesting is that when it comes to our cultural words, many of them came from other European languages. So we'd get a European word like cantare in Italian, which has suffixes, canto, canti, canta, but we've put the Maltese prefixes on them. In canta, canta, I canta. And then we have words like bonjour for bonjour and bonsoir for bonsoir. So there are lots of foreign words because we are a country of immigrants and not illegal immigrants ever since the beginning of our time because of our geographical position in the middle of the Mediterranean, which also shows why we were a British colony during World War II. But that's another story.
Thank you so much, Maria. So anonymous attendee, I hope that answers your question. There's some other questions about the Maltese language that I think you just answered as well. And yes, everyone, please read Adrian Grima's wonderful. Adrian, I think you're here actually as one of the attendees. Thank you so much for contributing both a poem that was translated by Albert Gatt and an essay about being in Paris and recognizing the sounds of Maltese in the Arabics, multiple Arabics, which I love that you said. And actually, if I may, as an Indonesian person whose language is also very influenced by Arabic, there are actually similar words in Maltese and Indonesian that I've noticed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. So as ever, the joys of being an editor. So I'm gonna be a little cheeky and just skip a few audience questions, and so that I can get to some that I've been dying to ask both of you for a bit. We will go back to audience questions in a bit. So Priscilla, as a therapist, you're obviously interested in mental health, and your bio specifies you're interested in arts and health. I feel like a lot of your poems relate to interiorities and the mental health of women. Do you think that is how your profession as a therapist intersects with your other profession of being a poet, or are there other connections between the arts and health that you're particularly interested in?
Well, really and truly, I'm a speech and language pathologist, a speech and language therapist, a medical one. So, and then I'm also a gerontologist with a special focus on gerogogists. So the intersection is really not in terms of mental health, but in terms of how I try to bring in the arts, including poetry and reading and literature, in the settings that I work in. So in long-term care settings with older adults in active aging units and in day centers, and in the acute setting as well. So, and this is important to me because if I have to look at the older adults, especially the very, very old, the silent generation, so to speak, probably one can say that they have little cultural capital. And initially, I just wanted to share my passion and my interests with them. But again, the arts in health open up a whole new world in the sense that they not only have benefit on an individual level, because they have effects at physiological level, there's cognitive stimulation, and so they affect brain plasticity, they affect the mood and the emotions, and they decrease depression and decrease a sense of loneliness. But they are when people come together through the arts in a poetry reading, they actually have the opportunity to share their own associations with what they are reading, and to dialogue and discuss, and so, and to form friendships and socialize. So the arts and health are also very beneficial at community level, not only at an individual level.
Can I ask how you include poetry in an acute care setting? You were saying, how would you do that?
I have participated in 2 projects in the past at the acute hospital. One was called The Art of Well-Being, although well-being is a topical term, but at the same time, it's difficult to define. And it was a collaboration between Atelier projects and the hospital, Mater Dei Hospital, the main hospital, and the university in Torino, which runs community theater, I believe. And apart from the singing and the theater that they included, we included poetry. We went on the renal ward, for example, and we read out short pieces of poetry to the people who were having dialysis. And we were really astonished because because obviously there was a mix of persons there, both older adults and younger persons. And we were surprised to see how everyone felt that it was a bit of a ray of sunshine in their day. So they weren't only looking at the television. But through Initiamed as well, together with a number of poet friends of mine, we used to go to the oncology hospital through an artist in residence. And we also used to read poetry to them. And obviously poetry is a place of encounter and dialogue. And it creates this opportunity for them to be able to speak about what's meaningful to them,
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much. That's wonderful that you've been doing all of that. Thank you. So there is a question, there are a few questions from the audience. First, I'd like to say, however, if you're not aware that it is actually currently Women in Translation Month, August 2023 is Women in Translation Month. So if you use hashtag WIT month, you'll find a lot of stuff on social media, a lot of recommendations. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all of us here today from the contributors and also myself, we all happen to be women who work in translation or with translation. I wanted to ask about, Maria, you said so much that was really, really important about the history of Maltese women in writing. And I wanted to ask, both of you have worked with each other. Maria, you have translated Priscilla's work, including one of the poems that she translated. And I wanted to ask about cooperation and collaboration between women writers in Malta, amongst yourselves. And if you think, is it like a tight-knit group? Are there different kinds of groups going on? What is the scene like? And how did you start collaborating?
Well, it's tighter than it used to be. I was alone, unfortunately, for many years because of being one of the very first to get a tertiary education, the first to do English literature, which obviously influenced my formal style. And so I didn't really have anybody to cooperate with. I just wish to mention, because Priscilla mentioned mental health and poetry, that what I had to collaborate with was poetry because I have bipolar disorder. So it has helped me a great deal also to communicate with other people. I am very lucky because I am young at heart and because I found myself involved in Initiamed also through my connection with LAF. And this kept me in touch with many of the young women authors who I see regularly when they can put up with me because I'm a great chatterbox and I talk non-stop. But I try to be as close to them as properly as possible. And I am very, very lucky because I'm also very, very loved.
Oh,
But they can, of course, as a community, read each other's works, where I don't have very many people I can share with.
yeah.
And this I feel whereas they do. They can share each other's work and they encourage each other.
That's
So
wonderful.
that I miss.
Yeah. Priscilla, from your generation, what is your perspective? Oh, sorry, what were you going to say? I think you're muted.
no, I'm not.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I just wanted to add that in my work with older adults, I tend to use one of Maria's poems, which is also the title of her first collection, right? Is Damush Bis. And it speaks about the role of woman, but not the role of woman as an individual, right, Maria? And that the woman isn't there only in her traditional role, but she also is there for others as an entity by herself. And I share this poem as well with the older adults that I work with. So I wanted to add that as well. Sorry, you were going to ask.
No, that's really lovely to hear. Thank you. I'm going back to some audience questions. So John Paul, who works for Maltese National Book Council, thank you very much, has asked Maria specifically, as a bilingual poet, are there instances when you can only write in Maltese or when you can only write?
Yes. My last two collections have been in English, precisely because as a matter of age and also for health reasons, I am not as involved with other writers as I used to be. So there isn't the stimulation I had before with writers writing in Maltese. So my last two collections, one published only 2 months ago, have been in English. And sometimes a poem comes in Maltese. I've been asked recently for a poem in Maltese for a specific purpose, and I managed to write it. But I was pushed when inspiration comes as in the first poem. You know, something else I wanted to say for the audience member who asked about Maltese. The poem which Priscilla referred to is Damush Bis. I remember by heart the first lines, if you want me to just say them, as you wish.
We would love that. Thank you. Please.
Shall I now? Lita pajjiżi jiena taħbibi rabati li jiena bintkom fuq kollox omkom, martek fuq kollox naf. Jiena wkoll għalikom u bikom jien ukoll iżda mhux biss. And I can tell you what that means.
Thank you so much. So I hope that Kate and Caroline and Catherine, that sates your curiosity. And again, as I mentioned, please go to our website for more work in Maltese. Thank you so much. Okay, so what other questions do we have here? All right. So, oh, not a question, but a thank you to Maria for her book, Memory Rape, which I've enjoyed reading over the years. Really looking forward to this issue of MPT. Thank you, Caroline. Kate says, yes, thanks for the Maltese. DC Area Literary Translators, thank you for joining us. DC Area Literary Translators asked, as Maltese includes many migrant words, are there also native words that one can use to substitute those that come from across the seas? Either one of you, if you'd like to speak.
Maria is more of the linguist here, so
yeah, well, I never did linguistics, and right off, because one of the things which age has brought to me today is brain fog. But one I can think of which has no translation in any language is zanzan, which means put on a dress for the very first time. Or it can also mean, nowadays, I mean Dhaka, zanzan dario, zanzan carrozza, which means you're using it for the very first time. We did some research into this, also with Mena Elfin, who asked about it. So it's a word which does not have an equivalent in a language as a word. You can only translate it into the phrase. But we have some lovely words like kesh. We use X a lot. You know, when you frighten someone or thrill them, and it's kesh. I am feeling goose pimples. You know, so it also has something to do with, we've got lots of these words, you know.
An amazing word. I might start using
it. I thought I'd mention that.
Thank you so much.
Can you think of any, Priscilla? No, okay.
Maybe Prosper. Maybe Prosper.
Which means?
Yes, actually.
You just mentioned
Prosper. It's the name of the Prosper Press.
Yeah. What does Prosper mean, Priscilla?
Like doing silly little things.
Wonderful. So thank you for Zamza the X-Word, says Indran Amir Tanayagam for DC Area Literary Translators. Mena Elfin says, thanks to you all from Wales. Fascinating readings and lovely hearing Maltese. Thanks, Priscilla and Maria Diolch. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Mena? D-I-O-L-C-H. Diolch? That's Welsh, says Mena. So there's anonymous attendee asks, I also have a question for both BSL interpreters, if possible. Lynn and Audrey, so you don't feel free not to respond, but if you'd like to, they have a question for either of you. How do you translate the Maltese and Arabic words that the poets have used into BSL? Thanks.
We'd usually if we know the meaning, then we could translate the meaning, but the word itself probably doesn't have a BSL equivalent. So we'd have to either spell the word and then give whatever meaning is associated with that word.
I see. So when Priscilla said prosper, or when Maria said kesh, you were spelling the individual letters and
yes.
Then you say what it means. Okay, wonderful. Great. Thank you for asking that. So Caroline Maldonado asks, thank you both readers. Maltese is such an interesting ancient language and so different from English. Do you both find the experience of writing different in each language in content, form, style, etc. Similar to some of the earlier questions, but not quite. So Priscilla and Maria, do you find when you write in English, when you write in Maltese, do you find the experience is different? Do you use different styles in each language? Different content, different form?
Shall I go, Maria?
Yes, please.
Maria mentioned actually her age as having influenced the way she writes and the language in which she writes. Now, I'm younger. However, I used to attend a Catholic school, and in this school, we used to be silenced if we actually spoke in Maltese. So, or ignored by some people. So in a way, for me as well, writing in Maltese is a bit more effortful than if I had to write something in English. But then again, I'm not as dedicated and diligent as most of the Maltese poets are, in the sense that I'm always working on this collection of mine, but it never materializes. But yes, to me, I seem to find, to me, it's different the way when I write Maltese, I have to look up the words more. And when I write in English. So even though I'm younger, Maria. So.
Oh, thank you for that history as well. I think a lot of people will be unaware of that history. So Adrienne Grima, who has been mentioned a few times already, our one of our contributors, says, just to add to what Priscilla said about the Maltese word praspar, as in praspar press, it comes from the verb paspar, which means to invent stories, to imagine things. Thank you so much, Adrienne. That's a really great link there, you know, inventing stories and imagining things and then doing little things based on the stories, kind of. Philip Turpin says, thank you for such an illuminating Zoom. When I was very unwell a few years ago, I had a lot of fun facilitating the writing of haikus on my ward, especially among the medical staff. It worked really well. I wonder if it could be done in Maltese and English. Also, the idea of involving grandchildren and grandparents together in the elderly care centers. Wow, Priscilla, what do you have to say about that? That's a really neat idea, putting grandkids and grandparents together. Thank you, Philip.
There are other artists who work on intergenerational projects. I don't recall me as such having run one myself, with the odd workshop here and there, where a few youths from sixth form, that is the before they enter university, where they attended one of the workshops that I was giving, and like they had a discussion. There was a discussion between the younger generation and the older generation around that particular theme or topic. But personally, I haven't yet worked on such a topic like haiku-inspired intergenerational work. But yes, that's a great idea, definitely.
Thank you so much. So we have to wrap up in just a couple of minutes. Ken says, Ken, your friend Maria says, it's zanzan. Oh, apologies. Which is also the onomatopoeic description of the buzzing of the wasp, zunzana. I apologies for any mispronunciation on my part. I said zamzam, which is the Arabic word for like holy water. So again, cross wires. Karen Alkalaigut says, thank you for such a generous reading and discussion. Thank you, Priscilla and Maria. Tanuvi Jo says, thank you for such a wonderful session. Are there, okay, this is the last question that I'm putting to both of you before we end. Tanuvi Jo says, thank you for such a wonderful session. Are there any poetic forms that exist in Maltese poetry only?
Yes, the hendecasyllable. I don't know if it exists anywhere else, but the hendecasyllable is used for classic Maltese poetry, and lots of people even today use it. I've never used it myself. I write free verse. Even I wrote a sonnet once in English, just once. But I mean, it's, you know, I can't be free in it, and I'm a free spirit. But the hendecasyllable is normally used, even by Emmanuel Mifsud, for example, and Mobet Wijaya, who have contributed, which is obviously not in translation. But, you know, But
Thank-
otherwise, I don't use it. What about Priscilla? I
I don't think I have.
You use it.
No. Unless perhaps when I was, I don't know, trying to experiment when I was younger. I don't recall, no.
Thank you both so much. Thank you to Audrey and Lynn for your BSL translation and interpretation. Kate says this has been so immensely wonderful and very inspiring. Thank you so much. A special thanks to the great BSL ladies. Looking at the sign language while listening gave a beautiful extra flow to it all. NB, I love the introductions and Maltese words. Be well, Kate. And Anonymous says, Grazie Hafna. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, perfect.
I'm so glad I came along to this and really we look forward to reading the issue. Well, we'd love to hear what you all think about the issue. You can contact us. We're online at MPT Magazine. On socials, you can just search for Modern Poetry and Translation. So feel free to let us know what you think about the issue, what you think about the poetry, what you think about the essays and reviews in this. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much to Priscilla and Maria for giving up your time and sharing your beautiful work with us. Thank you for being in this issue and for being here today.